Last week, I'm going to go back one more. We talked about the wilderness. And when we talked about the wilderness, we talked about, it's a 2-week series, what gets you in the wilderness. And we went over the story that was in Numbers 13 and 14, and how the Israelites sent out the 12 spies, and they were getting ready to go to the promised land, the land that God had promised them, flowing with milk and honey, what they have been longing for so many years, coming out of slavery, out of Egypt. And they sent the 12 spies in, and only 2 came back with a positive report, while the other 10 spread bad rumors amongst the people to where they not only didn't want to go into the promised land, they wanted to go back to Egypt. They wanted to stone their current leaders, go back to Egypt, and go back into slavery. So I looked at those 2 chapters, not to kind of expound every bit and piece of scriptural information that was in those 2 chapters, but just to kind of take a bird's eye view and say, what are some of the things that the Israelites did that got them in the wilderness? Because they spent 40 years in the wilderness because they did not listen to God. So there were several things that the Israelites did. And the reason we looked at that is because everybody goes through periods of time when they're in a wilderness of sorts. And one of the most important things that we can do is maybe see what are the type of behaviors that we do to ourselves that would put us in a wilderness type of situation. So we looked at that. And this week, we're going to look at what gets you out of the wilderness. But first, I wanted to talk about another type of wilderness. Last week I talked about the Desert Dome that's in Omaha. It's the largest indoor desert. And I talked about how it was the zoo that was in my hometown, Omaha, Nebraska. We went lots of times. We went with my little cousins. They had all kinds of animals. I said, if there's a wilderness that I could experience without actually being in danger, it was the Desert Dome. This week, I want to kind of just give you another picture of what I envision when I hear the wilderness, and I thought of Yellowstone National Park. Because my family and I took a vacation to Yellowstone several years back. We stayed in Bozeman, Montana, and we explored for an entire day Yellowstone National Park. And if you don't know this, Yellowstone has 2,219,789 acres. It is incredibly big. It is larger than Rhode Island and Delaware put together. There are 17 different species of animals. Of bison, moose, elk, etc. They have 2 different types of species of bear. They have 67 other mammals, and they have over 300 species of birds. They have 16 species of fish, and they inhabit the infamous gray wolf. And this is one of my favorite pictures. They have Old Faithful, the geysers, and they have what they call these things, I want to say it right, the cauldrons, which are basically springs of hot water that come up out of the earth, and they are just absolutely beautiful. I mean, they're blue and they have kind of rainbow colors, and they change colors with the seasons that are around them, and they have over 10,000 thermal features, more than 300 geysers, and over 290 waterfalls. Now, when we went to Yellowstone, they built these boardwalks that kind of ventured out into these cauldrons or these hot springs, and they didn't have any railings, and they're really, really long. And I remember my parents were freaking out because my little sister was fairly young at that age, at that trip. And, you know, it's like, if you fall in, there is no rescue plan. You're gone. They've had dogs fall in and people fall in. And there are, I think, next to none of the springs that are cooler than boiling temperature. So the springs I saw, they have some that are up to 460 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you fall in, it's it's only risking moral lives to even attempt to go in. And I mean, walking across those is pretty scary. And you talk about the wilderness, I would not want to be anywhere near there at dark, because who knows what you might wander into and be gone. So they also have bison. They had lots of cool bison. I saw a story the other day that said in Yellowstone Park there was a young couple, and they were afraid that the bison were getting cold, so they went to go put a blanket on the bison and ended up getting injured. They're fine, I promise you. They're big, hairy animals. They got the old grizzly bear, and I love telling this story because this is the epitome of a wilderness to me. We were hiking kind of around the Yellowstone area, and we had a guide, and he said, he showed us different places. He had all kinds of crazy experiences when he would just take a backpack and a rifle and go hunt for weeks at a time, just him and himself and his equipment. And he said, if you go hiking anywhere, make sure you get some bear spray. And I said, what is bear spray? And it's basically pepper spray that's 10 plus times stronger than police grade pepper spray. And if you see that highly detailed photograph on the right, it's this big can, and it shoots pepper spray for up to 8 to 10 seconds of a full jet, 30 plus feet. And it's just, you carry it in a holster, and it's got a little button, and you whip it out, and you just, and it's like the last line of defense, because unless you have a really high-powered rifle, you're not going to kill a bear. You're just going to make it mad. So the things that they encourage you to buy when you're going hiking anywhere is this stuff called bear spray. And when I thought of the wilderness, I thought of bears, bison, gray wolves, hot springs that you could fall in and melt, all this crazy stuff. And I'm like, this is fun to see. I would go camping, but I don't know if I go camping here. And then on top of that, the guide says, well, Yellowstone is just a big volcano. It could erupt at any time and take out the entire west coast of the United States. And I'm like, oh, that's great. The wilderness. I defined the wilderness last week as a place you do not want to be. Metaphorically, spiritually, the wilderness is a place you do not want to be. And when we talk about a spiritual wilderness for me, and the things that I could think of, was a place where we are far from God, a place where we are afraid, a place where we feel apathetic, a place where we feel like at this current season we don't have a purpose, a place where we just feel tired and exhausted all the time, a place where we feel lost. We don't know where God is taking us in this particular season. And when I think of the wilderness, if we're talking about spiritual wilderness, those things define seasons that have occurred in my life. And that's why last week we talked about what gets you into those seasons. But this week we're going to look at what gets you out. And I want to look at Joshua. If you turn in your scriptures, in your Bibles with me there, to Joshua. We're going to start just in chapter 1. Now, I think I had one slide right here. We're going to look at 6 chapters. Now, we are not going to read all 6 chapters. Last week and this week, again, were a bird's eye view of the story of the Israelites and how they came out of Egypt. They wandered in the desert for 40 years because of what they had done in disobeying God. But then eventually, they did make it out of the wilderness into the promised land. And it's taking a bird's eye view of different parts of that particular story and seeing what did they do that got them in the wilderness, and then what did they do that got them out of the wilderness. So we had the map, and Nola told me, if you're ever in the wilderness, just ask a woman for directions. And I said, yes, that is true. Asking a woman for directions is usually where I or other males would go wrong and getting lost, and our map looks like that. And the Israelites wandered around in the desert for 40 years. And as I showed last week, they kind of hung out in the desert of Kadesh Barnea. And then the story that we're going to see starting in Joshua chapter 1 is they have finally made it up out of the desert, and they camped out over here, and Moses dies on a mountain. And Joshua 1 is God commissioning Joshua, saying, Moses is dead, now it's your turn to lead. And look, we're going to cross the Jordan River, conquer Jericho, and you guys are going to get out of the wilderness and into the promised land. So, if you would turn with me to Joshua chapter 1, we're going to look at verses 1 and 2, and then verses 6 through 9. We're going to look at Joshua 1, we're going to look at Joshua 2, we're going to look at Joshua 3, and then we're going to skip to Joshua 6, just so we can kind of see the steps that the Israelites took to get themselves out of the wilderness. So Joshua chapter 1, verses 1 through 2. It says, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, my servant Moses is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give to them, to the Israelites. I will give you I'm about to give you to them, the Israelites. So, talk about being slapped in the face with reality. God just says plainly to Joshua, he says, hey, Moses, yeah, he's dead. It's your turn now to lead the people. And he says not only that, but it's time to chart a new direction. Now, the Israelites were not, 1,000 people, a church of 70, 80. This was millions and millions of people that were wandering in the desert looking to one leader. And that one leader, Moses, was, even throughout scriptures, aside from Jesus, looked at as one of the greatest leaders in history. And Joshua has to fill his shoes. Joshua comes and realizes Moses is dead, and God says, all right, Joshua, it's your turn now. It's time to go somewhere new. It's time to get out of the wilderness. It's time to be led into the promised land, which we should have been there 40 years ago. And I'm not leading millions and millions of people, but I can empathize with Joshua's position. I mean, I'm 24 years old. Dave Riley was the founding pastor of Cornerstone. He had pastored here for many, many, many years. I have learned under Dave Riley, just like Joshua learned under Moses. And then through the transition took place, and now I have become the lead pastor. And Dave's not dead, but, it's been a passing of a torch. And it's crazy to think that, we can get in situations where we're in a new season of life, where we're taking on new responsibilities, where we are heading in a different direction, that people in history have gone through similar things that we go through right now. And Moses is gone, and Joshua is in the lead, and God begins to give Joshua some words of advice. Starting in verse 6, he says to Joshua, be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their forefathers to give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Do not let this depart from your mouth. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Joshua has just assumed all these incredibly surmounting responsibilities. Millions of people. Not only that, but they're not wandering the desert anymore. They are wandering and purposely taking a direction into the promised land. And he has a choice to follow God in the new direction or continue wandering the desert. And that is why God says, be strong and courageous. He says, meditate on this law day and night. Do not let the law that Moses gave you depart from your mouth. He says, what I have trained you to do, what I have taught you to do, what Moses taught you to do it. Study me, learn from me. Let me guide your steps, step by step. And he said, I will be with you wherever you go. And 3 times in these couple of verses, he says, be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. Be very strong and courageous. And Joshua, after hearing these words, goes on to assemble the men of Israel and says, let's get ready. Pack up your stuff. We're going into the promised land. And if there is something in this story that I see that is a behavior, that is a choice that would help us get out of the wilderness, that would help us take our first step in a new direction, just like Joshua led the Israelites. If there is something that we can do when we're in those seasons of life where we feel lost, where we feel afraid, where we feel purposeless, where we feel apathetic, if there is something from this story that I see, it is to be strong and courageous. Just like God told Joshua to be strong and courageous. God was telling Joshua at that specific time, in that specific situation, to be strong and courageous. But those words can apply to us right here, right now. And when we're in a wilderness, courage seems hard. When we're in a wilderness, strength seems difficult to find. Because we don't know why we're here. We don't know necessarily where we're going. We don't know necessarily how we're going to get there. But a quote that I heard somebody say is, you get courage before you get clarity. God may not be telling you exactly where to go right now, the exact timing of things, exactly who you're supposed to talk to, exactly what path you're supposed to choose, but God gives you the courage before he gives you clarity. Joshua didn't know, how in the world are we going to do this? What's the timeline, God? How many years until we have fully conquered every city in Israel so that the land is 100% ours? There's a Jordan River up there. How are we going to do that? God guides you one step at a time. And courage always comes before clarity, because when you muster up the courage to do something with or for God, that's when God makes clear your next step. Another quote I heard that I just love on courage: no act of courage wasn't at first followed by a moment of vulnerability. What does that mean? It means to act on courage means that you are honest with yourself, that you are feeling vulnerable in a situation. I'm afraid. I've been in this wilderness for, it seems like, 2 years now. I'm nervous to build bridges back in this particular relationship. It's going to be messy. I'm afraid. I don't know, God, how this is going to work out. Vulnerability is not a bad word. Vulnerability means that you are honest with yourself in the situation. And only when you can be vulnerable and honest and open with where we're at, what's going on, what got us into the wilderness, where might God possibly be calling us, can we say, I'm going to take an act of courage, because I know my next step is not going to be easy. I know it's not going to be fun. I know I may not end up where I think I might end up, but I'm going to take the next step and be courageous. Be strong and courageous. Number one, something that can help us get out of the wilderness. Number two, Joshua sends in the spies. We're going to start by reading Joshua 2, verse 1. It says, Then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Go look over there. The land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. So, Notice that Joshua sent 2 spies in to the land to check it out again. And the spies came into this town of Jericho. And if you notice, this is a little bit of a risk, because what happened the last time the Israelites sent spies into the promised land? They came back, and then they wound up in the desert for 40 years because they were scared out of their mind. So Joshua takes a little bit of a risk here. He sends these 2 spies in, and they go check out Jericho. Now, they weren't hanging out at the prostitute's house because, what typically spies would do is they would hide where the travelers would hide, as to blend in. And it was common in that time that people who were traveling from city to city, they went looking for comfort, so they would go into the prostitute's house. So the spies, to kind of blend in, to keep from getting found out, went there like other travelers did. But, as we can see, the king found out that the spies were in the city. And the king found out that the spies were in Rahab's house. And they sent men to Rahab's house to get the spies. But Rahab had a little bit different perspective than the rest of the people of Jericho. And that Rahab said, I have seen what your God has done. You have parted the Red Sea. You have made it this far. You had all those plagues in Egypt that set us free. And I can see that the God of the universe is behind you. So I will protect you, Rahab said. She hid them on her roof, and I believe they said she hid him under some stalks. And these stalks were something that was commonly used to make into clothing. They would dry them out, and then they would spin them, and they would turn them into clothing. So she had all these stalks on her roof, and she hid the spies under the stalks. And then the guards came up, and they didn't see them. And then Rahab lied, and she said, they've already gone. Before the city gates closed, they exited and went back to where they came from. So the guards went looking for the 2 spies. Meanwhile, Rahab had hid the spies under the stalks on her roof. And she comes up and says, I have spared your life. Will you please spare mine? Because I know God is with you. Look at verses 14 to 16. This is what the spies say. Our lives for your lives. The men assured her, if you don't tell what we are doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us this land. So let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was a part of the city wall. Now she had said to them, go to the hills so the pursuers will not find you. Hide yourself there 3 days until they return, and then go on your way. So Joshua took this risk. He sent the 2 spies into the town that he was wanting to conquer, hoping that they did not get found, hoping that they came back with some intelligence per se. Rahab the prostitute hid them in her house, and then not only hid them, but then sent the guards in the wrong direction, and then gave the spies the right directions to be safe on their journey back to Joshua. And look how this risk paid off in verse 24. The spies got back to Joshua, and they said to Joshua, the Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting with fear because of us. I would say that was a risk that paid off. Joshua sent the spies. He knew the history of sending spies into the land with big people, big fortifications, big armies, but he sent the 2 spies. They were safe, and they came back not with a bad message, but with a positive message that God is surely going to give us this land because the people of Jericho are scared out of their mind. And when I see this story, which there are sermons and books and all these different types of things about each one of these different stories leading up to the Israelites coming out of the wilderness and taking on the promised land. But when I take a bird's eye view at Joshua chapter 2 and the story of the spies and Rahab, I see that one thing that stands out to me that they did to get out of the wilderness is they took a risk rooted in faith. And what does that mean? It means that God sometimes tells you the what, but not the how. God has said over and over and over to the Israelites, you will get the promised land. I will lead you there. I will make your nation great. I will give you peace on all sides. I will be with you. This is the plan. But he didn't always give them the how. Sometimes God gives us the what without the how, because he wants you to take a step in faith to get to the what that he has revealed to you. We have things that we pray about. We have things that we turn to God about, whether it's in our church, whether it's in our family, whether it's in our work. And sometimes God makes clear to you what he envisions for your family, what he envisions for your role at the church, what he envisions for your role at your work. And God can be very, very specific on what he reveals for you and your particular situation in your life, but he's not always clear on how you're going to get there. And a lot of times we wait and we wait and we wait and we wait when God's saying, take a step in faith. How can you know if you're getting any closer than if you just wait and wait and wait? And what I have found most often in my life is when I choose to take a step and it's wrong. Then I choose to take another step, it's wrong. When I choose to take another step, it's wrong. Then I realize God's telling me to wait. But very rarely have I realized in my life that just sitting and not doing anything and just waiting is God telling me to wait. It's the opposite. God wants you to take a risk, take a step of faith to move towards what he has planned for your life. What if Joshua would have just said, we're going to take the land, but we're going to wait here until God tells us exactly how we're going to do it. We're going to wait here until we hear word from Jericho that they're willing to put down their walls and let us take them over. Right? It doesn't happen that way, because God is waiting for you to take a step out in faith to show, God, I want to do what you want me to do. Does that mean you're going to take all the right steps in your life? No. Does that mean you're going to never make a mistake? No. Does that mean that you know exactly what your next step is going to be? No. But what it does mean is that how can you know unless you take a step? How can you know which direction you're supposed to go unless you take a step? And God gives you the strength and the courage when you take those steps. Most of the time, in my experience, he's not saying wait. He's saying take a step in faith, take a risk rooted in faith, and watch me work through that. Joshua 3. This is another cool story, bird's eye view, where the Israelites crossed the Jordan River. So we're going to look at just verses 5 through 8 real quick. So the Israelites, they got the great report from the spies that this land is surely ours. What they have to do before they go into Jericho is they have to cross the Jordan River. Verse 5, Joshua told the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you. Joshua said to the priests, take up the Ark of the Covenant and pass on ahead of the people. So they took it and went ahead of them. And the Lord said to Joshua, today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all Israel, so they may know that I am with you as I was with Moses. Tell the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant, when you reach the edge of the Jordan's waters, go and stand in the river. So here's the plan. Talking about a step of faith, talking about taking a risk in faith. They're about to cross the Jordan River, and what they do is remarkable. Look at verse 14. So when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is at flood stage, all during harvest. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarethan. While the water flowing down the sea of Arba, the salt sea, was completely cut off, so the people crossed over opposite Jericho. The priests who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completely crossed on dry ground. I'm going to go back to this picture just so you can see how important this step was for them to get to Jericho. They are coming up from down here in the desert, and they work their way up, and you can see there's a body of water completely separating them from where they want to be, which is on the other side, so that they can conquer Jericho. And it says that the Jordan River was at flood stage. And the Jordan River at flood stage, I researched it, can be anywhere from half a mile wide. So you're talking about getting men, women, children, carts, camps, everything that you own, millions of people, to cross a half-mile wide river. And what God told them to do is the priests would carry the Ark of the Covenant on poles on their shoulders. And the Ark of the Covenant held the Ten Commandments and other important artifacts of Israel's history in the Ark of the Covenant. And God had said, nobody can touch the Ark of the Covenant. And if you do, you'll be struck dead. So I would hate to have that job, carrying the Ark of the Covenant, trip on a rock, covenant lands on you, boom, you're gone. So they're carrying the Ark of the Covenant, and they were told to step in to the furious half-mile wide river and just see what happens. If they fall, probably gone. The Ark of the Covenant's gone, the whole nation's gone, because you lost the Ten Commandments again. So they have the poles on their shoulders. They go to take a step into the river. Boom, it's dry. The waters upstream completely stopped. And the entire nation of Israel walked across half a mile of river on dry ground. And after this victory, God told, take 12 men, walk back into the river where the priests and the Ark of the Covenant were still standing, and grab 12 stones from the middle of the riverbed and bring them back to the camp, and we're going to build an altar to celebrate what God has done. And looking at that story, how taking a risk, taking a step of faith leads into them crossing the Jordan River, having great faith. We're looking at a completely different nation, it seems like, than what we read in Numbers 13 and 14, where they were scared, where they wanted to stone their leaders, where they wanted to go back to Egypt, where they just wanted to starve and die in the desert, to now where they are venturing out one step at a time to come out of the wilderness into the promised land. And what they did along the way is they celebrated small victories. They had not yet conquered Jericho. And even if they did conquer Jericho, there were many, many, many city-states in the promised land that they would have had to go on, conquer, before they could rule the entire land just themselves. But they crossed the Jordan River, and they took time out of their journey to build an altar to God and celebrate what God had done right there, right then, and to honor Him and the steps that they were taking out of the wilderness. Every step is a learning opportunity. When you are trying to claw and work and strive to get out of the wilderness that you experience, the place you don't want to be, when you're afraid, when apathetic, when we feel purposeless, when we're trying to muster up all the courage, knowing, I know I feel this way, I'm going to take the courage, I'm going to take this step, I don't know if it's right. It's okay for it not to be right, because every step is a learning opportunity. Good, bad, ugly. And what makes it so beautiful, with every step being a learning opportunity, is that God can work through every step And I would think that we should celebrate the defeats as much as we celebrate the victories, because it's a learning opportunity. And if we are trying our best to muster up the courage to take a step in faith, we should celebrate the fact that we are just trying to take a step, and then celebrate God in that step. God, man, I took a step. It was definitely wrong, but now I know that's not the path I should go on. Celebrate that you know that's not the path to go on, because God made that clear to you. One of the biggest things we can do to get out of the wilderness is to celebrate the victories along the way. Last one. The fall of Jericho. This is what we've been building it up to. They have crossed the Jordan River. They have come out of the wilderness. They have crossed the Jordan River. And now they are at Jericho's walls, ready to see what God is going to do. So we're just going to read verses 1 through 5 real quick. It says, "Now Jericho was tightly shut up because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, 'See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its kings and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them, a long blast on the trumpets, have all of the people give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse and the people will go up, every man straight in.'" So that's not a very good picture. It's the best one I could find. A lot of archaeologists, a lot of biblical historians believe that's what the walls of Jericho looked like. Jericho sat up on a hill, and then at the top of the hill they had a wall around the city. And then down the embankment they had built up kind of a retaining wall to keep kind of the dirt in and make a more clean edge, and then they built a wall on top of that. And sitting at the very top was the city. Now, I don't know if you've ever paid attention in history class, looked at how cities were taken over. Not once in history that I know of did people just simply march around the city with trumpets to conquer a city. Usually what they would do is they would cut off the supply line. The city would be shut up so that nobody was getting in and nobody was getting out, and then the city inside and the people trying to conquer the city outside would fight and battle it out, try to tear down the walls, or simply just play a waiting game where they had no food, no water, and they would simply just wait for the city to surrender under siege. Jericho at this specific time had just harvested all of their crops. So they had all of the food that they needed for the entire winter just right there in their city. Jericho also had several springs within the city. So you're looking at a well-fortified city with all the resources it needed to outwait the people trying to siege the city. Well protected. Here are the little guys down here. You know, they'd have to get over this wall and get over that wall while people are shooting arrows at them, trying to conquer them. It did not look good for Israel. And this is what God tells them. Don't even try to battle. Once a day for 6 days. Put the trumpets out front, put the guards out front, put the trumpets, then the Ark of the Covenant, and just march around the city blowing the trumpets one time. Day 2, do the same thing. Day 3, do the same thing. Day 4, same thing. Day 5, same thing. Day 6, same thing. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times. And look what happens on that 7th time. We're going to start in verse 15. On the 7th day, they got up at daybreak and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, except that on that day, they encircled the city 7 times. The 7th time around, when the priest sounded the trumpet blast, Joshua commanded the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." Skip down with me to verse 20. When the trumpet sounded, the people shouted, and at the sound of the trumpet, when the people gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. So every man charged straight in, and they took the city. You talk about the weirdest battle story ever. Well, what'd you do? Well, we just marched around with trumpets for 7 days. Really? It must have bad trumpet playing or something? No, the walls just fell, right? And they marched around one time for 6 days, and on the 7th day, they marched around 7 times. And I am a logical person. I'm a little bit skeptical in some situations, and I could think that the soldiers at that time would be like, Joshua, what are we doing? We realize this is doing no good. The people are laughing at us over the walls. What is going on? You really expect us to conquer the city of Jericho by marching around one time a day and blowing trumpets and carrying our most prized artifacts in a case? You really think that's what's going to do it? But they stuck with it. God told them that's what it would do to conquer the city, and they did it. First day, second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, sixth day, seventh day. And the walls fell. They've actually excavated the city of Jericho and have found that the walls looked like they had not been conquered, but that they had actually collapsed in an earthquake type of fashion, with the exception of one side of the wall where they believe to have been Rahab's house full of her family, rescued because of her act in faith to protect the spies. When it comes to looking at this story, just the remarkability, just how crazy this story is, something that I think that got them out of the wilderness was being consistent and committed. Doing something they knew God told them to do. Doing something that didn't necessarily make 100% sense. Something that, they had gotten this far, we might as well keep going. They were consistent and committed for 6 days, and on the 7th day, and the walls fell. When it comes to working our way out of a wilderness, when it comes to battling apathy, when it comes to looking at our lives and saying, what is my next step? What is my next step? God, where are you leading me right now? We can never work our way out of a wilderness if we're not willing to be consistent and committed. Praying to God one time is really good. Praying to God every day for 5 minutes for a year is even better. Reading your Bible is really good. Taking 5 to 10 minutes every morning to open the scriptures is even better. Working your way out of a wilderness is not a 5-minute type of thing. Working your way out of the wilderness is not one big prayer type of thing. Working your way out of the wilderness is not showing up to church 1 week out of every month. Getting out of the wilderness is saying, I'm committed and I'm going to be consistent because I know the wilderness I am, God can get me out if I turn to Him on a consistent, committed basis. Whatever that looks like for you, whatever your next step might be, try commitment and consistency. And one of the best things that breaks consistency and commitment is distractions. Man, it's easy to get distracted. Sleep is distracting. I don't want to get up early and read my Bible. I'll just sleep in, right? Or this is my time I've set apart. Ooh, I got a text message. Oh, Facebook notification, right? Or, I got work to do. The lawn hasn't been mowed in 3 weeks. I better mow the lawn instead of doing that or doing this. Distractions keep us from being committed and consistent. And that's why we make war with distractions and peace with commitment. Saying that is a distraction, I am cutting that out during this time of day. That is a distraction. No longer will I let that impede on the commitment that I want to make to take my next step to get out of this wilderness. Peace comes when we say, this isn't easy, but I've decided to be committed. 4 things that can help us get out of the wilderness. Being strong and courageous. Understanding where we're at, taking the tough step forward. Number 2, taking risks rooted in faith. Saying, God, sometimes you tell me to wait, But I want it clear that I need to wait, and I'm going to take a step until you make it clear that I just need to wait, because you're guiding me every step of the way. Number 3, celebrating small victories. Every step you take, every move you make, everything you see God in, celebrate it. Be consistent and committed. We get there by working through a process over time, not big events, but through every single day commitment. 4 things that can help us get out of the wilderness. Let's go to God in prayer. Heavenly Father, we praise you and thank you that you are a God who can get us out of the wilderness.